So you've come to this video to learn a little bit about what different graphic file types mean, what they're good for, and you're probably looking for an answer for a very specific file type. I'm going to tell you in this video, I'm going to go over a lot of different file types. So if you're hunting here for just one, look along the bottom of the video for chapters and kind of mouse over and find the chapter you want to go to. Now, if you are a glutton for punishment and want to hang in here and learn the whole thing, we're going to learn about JPEGs, PNGs, TIFFs, oh my, and a lot of other different file types, what they're good for, what they're not good for, and what you should be using them for if you're a photographer, a graphic designer, or a small business owner that just simply wants this information. So what does all of this mean? What even is a file type? So you can save your graphic images, whether that is a photograph or a graphic design, in a whole variety of formats. Different formats have different capabilities. Some of them are meant to make files smaller so that they're easier to pass through the bandwidth of the internet. Other files are meant to make graphics infinitely scalable so they can be scaled up to fit on a billboard or other very large uses like an expo booth. So understanding what file types are, especially if you're in the graphic design industry, or if you're a small business or a photographer who's serving that industry or providing files to that industry, this information is really important to know. Now, the three probably most common formats that you're going to run into are JPEG, TIFF, and PNG. And each of them have like their own little acronym. And I always find these a little bit fun trivia points. So JPEG stands for Joint Photographic Experts Group, TIFF for Tagged Image File Format, and PNG for Portable Network Graphic. Now, you couldn't really discern from those names exactly what those things are good for or what that file type actually does to help us in our digital life. And that's what this video is about. So let's dive in with our most common file type, which is a JPEG. Now, JPEGs can be abbreviated on your computer. The extension can be JPG or it can be JPEG. So it is the most widely accepted format that is out there. One of the things that the JPEG is known really well for is being able to make larger images go through the bandwidth of the internet faster because they're what we call lossy compression. So some of these file types will take the original file type, which may be heavy and big, and they will compress that file type and make it lighter and more accessible so that it moves through the internet faster. And years ago, that was really, really critical. Today, it's still critical, maybe not so much, but it's still critical. So the way that a JPEG works, let's say for an example on a photograph, which JPEGs are especially designed for. They're very good with photographic or more detail typed images than, let's say, line art. JPEGs are not a good choice for line art. So what it does is it takes a look at a photograph, and let's say that photograph has maybe 300 different shades of green. Some of those shades of green are shades of green that even the human eye can't perceive, but depending upon what the bit depth and all the other things that the camera that was used to take the photo was set to, there can be a lot of data in those shades of green. What JPEG does is it looks at those and says, well, these like 4 or 5 are really close together, so I'm going to condense that and make it one color. Now, perception wise, for human beings, we can't really perceive the difference. And after all, we're the ones looking at the image. And so what this does is it reduces the amount of data that that file has to store. And along the way, what that does is makes it smaller and makes it go faster through the internet. Now, the big problem with JPEGs is that it does this process every single time you save over that file. So if you start out with a JPEG that has those 300 shades of green and you save over it, and let's say it reduces those down to 150 shades of green, then the next time you save the file, it'll look at being able to reduce that even further. And maybe you'll go down to 50 different shades of green. Do you see what I mean? So all of the way down, the file keeps getting smaller and smaller. In reality, what is happening is you're having some degradation of data. So it's important if a JPEG, if you're a photographer, let's say, and you're wanting to use a JPEG or send JPEGs to your clients, that you not save a JPEG of a JPEG of a JPEG. So as it continues to evolve, it loses data, and eventually that will start to show up in the image. And that's not exactly what we want. As photographers, we tend to be pretty picky about wanting our images to be very detailed. JPEG opens on just about any device. It is like one of the most widely accepted image types that you can have out there. And it will work on the internet. It will work for print. It'll work on a phone. It will even work on a television in most cases. So as long as the TV has a place to stick a card. All right. So it's a very acceptable format. It is good for print and digital. All right. TIFF is the next file I want to talk about, because we talked about that lossy compression of a JPEG. TIFF offers us the capability to choose to have what's called lossless compression. In other words, you have zipped files on your computer. I'm sure at some point in time, if you haven't zipped files, you've probably opened a zipped file, and you've noticed that the file, when it's zipped, is smaller than the file when it opens. So when it opens, when you unzip it, it becomes much larger. Well, TIFF offers us the capability of being able to do that with our images using a compression that kind of stores the file at a smaller size. But when we open it in a graphic software application to use the file, the information will actually be there. And it's lossless compression. So many times high-end printing, like when we go to print a brochure or a catalog or have our images printed in a book or a magazine, they prefer to have a TIFF image. So TIFF also is very widely accepted. It does, another feature of it is it does support layers and transparency, where a JPEG will not. Now, the next file type we're going to talk about is PNG, and PNG will also support transparency. That means if you have a graphic that is against a background, that you can leave the data out of the background. So when that graphic is put digitally on another background, the background that you place it over will show up. TIFF also can store layers, which means that it's a really widely accepted format for graphics software programs like Photoshop that can save that file in layers, and then those layers can be read by other programs as well. So it's a nice compatible way to send large or files across many different devices or to many different places and be able to widely be opened. It is very good for print in large format. It is not good for websites, social, etc. One, just simply because it creates a much larger file. The same file from, let's say, a raw photograph saved as a JPEG and saved as a TIFF, the TIFF is going to be considerably larger, heavier weight, not move through the internet fast enough, whereas the JPEG will be smaller. All right, so let's talk about PNG. So PNG files are kind of this little interesting marriage between JPEGs and TIFFs. They're kind of like an interesting middle ground. They do not offer you the capability of saving layers, but they do offer transparency. PNGs are also known for being very sharp, but they're also going to be more heavyweight than, let's say, a JPEG file. Now, remember back when I was talking about JPEGs, I told you that a JPEG is not good for line art. PNGs are. So they can contain the data, and that's what I mean by sharpness, is the resolution or the crispness of the lines or the details in a photograph. So they're very good for those things. Many times, social media gurus will tell you to save your social media files in PNG because the compression that happens when you upload that to any given platform, because they're going to compress it so it goes faster through the platform. So social media platforms, if you weren't aware, they're very concerned about user experience, and users do not have a lot of patience. So they want their graphic files to go quickly. So they're going to compress and change the format of that graphic file so it does. But a PNG gives them more data to do their compression with. And so the compression tends to come out a little bit better than, let's say, giving them a JPEG file that already had a measure of compression applied to it. So these are good for anywhere that you need a crisp graphic or transparency. They come in two flavors, PNG8 and PNG24. So that is the wideness of colors that are available in that particular format. Of course, a PNG8 is going to be smaller in size than a PNG24 just because the latter offers more capability. All right, our next file type has fallen a little bit out of favor in mainstream graphics, but it's definitely in favor in the world of little clips and memes and animations that you get on your computer. And that is the GIF or GIF. And there is a perpetual argument whether it is a GIF or a GIF. So this is a very lossy compression format. So it tends to make the smallest files of all. It stands for graphic interchange format, and it was actually very popular before JPEG really came on the scene. So I remember years ago, your choices were GIF or JPEG or TIFF. So those were it. The interesting thing about GIFs or GIFs is that they do offer you the ability to have little animations. So you can save little clips of video, or you can create little animated graphics that get saved in a file and actually move. And oddly enough, they're very displayable on any device. They tend to be way smaller in size, so they move great through digital pipelines. But this is at the cost of the color range because, of course, you're reducing the amount of color that is available to you. So GIFs and GIFs are good for memes. They're good for being able to do anything animated that you want to do and be able to send somebody else as fun. They do not tend to work really well in any type of serious, what I would consider serious graphics, where you're sending it off to a printer to be printed in a brochure, or where you're using it on a social media channel with an image that doesn't need to be animated or that you want to have displayed in a fairly large format. So like screen size, GIFs or GIFs get really, really degraded when we blow them up. All right, the next file type, which you will see graphics saved in, is PDF. So PDF is portable document format, and years and years ago, we struggled with the Mac and PC divide. So back when I very first got into graphics and graphic design, there was this divide. Like you couldn't share files between a Mac and a PC. If you created the document in one, it couldn't even be displayed in the other. And PDFs offered us the ability to be able to do that. And I can remember being super excited about the fact that I, as a Mac user, could send my PC buddies documents that I wanted to share with them that I didn't have to print out and physically send to them. In the interim, so gray hairs I've earned. So in the interim, this has become the industry standing for printing and press. Because it is so widely acceptable on a variety of different software platforms, programs, everywhere. It has become the way that we save files when they need to go to print or when they need to go to press, or if we need to distribute something that we don't want to be easily and readily editable, like somebody can click the enter key on their computer and completely destroy the formatting on. That's a PDF. That's exactly why you see it show up in workbooks that you get when you download a lead magnet. You see it in quick reference cards. I mean, it has a multitude of applications. And depending on how they're saved, these PDF files can be small, so they run quickly through that digital pipeline, or they can retain all of their layer elements so that they can be edited even in Photoshop. So they're very highly compatible, and they also support interactivity, which means that you can create links, i.e. table of contents, that will take a user to another place in the document. Now, something that trips people up with PDFs is, how on earth do I make these things? So in typical, you're going to find in most software programs that will allow for printing, there will be a way to print to a PDF. So versus printing to a printer like this guy back here that physically kicks out pieces of paper, this is going to print to this digital printer that will kick out a document that can be opened on a computer. All right. The next file type I want to talk about is EPS. And this is one that I constantly, as a graphic designer, I constantly ran into problems trying to explain to clients because this particular file type is not compatible with a lot of different software programs that your typical average human has access to. If you're a graphic designer, it is very compatible with things like Illustrator, Photoshop, Affinity. Like you can open it in a multitude of different graphic programs, but you can't just click on it. Like all of the file types that we've covered up to this point, you can pretty well click on any computer and open, and it'll open in some type of a preview format. It may not let you edit it, but it will open in a way that you can see it. EPS doesn't always do that. Sometimes people have a really hard time even being able to see it. And then they're like, what is this file? I don't understand it. It doesn't open. Causes all kinds of confusion. But basically what this is an encapsulated PostScript file. And it's very, very good for vector graphics. Now, vector graphics are typically line art. So they're things that have a lot of crisp edges. Logos are typically vector graphics. And the cool things about vector graphics, without getting into a whole lot of detail, is to tell you that it's infinitely scalable. In other words, whatever you see, it can be teeny tiny, like a logo on a business card, or you can take that same file and you can blow it up to billboard size, and it will retain the crispness and resolution in the lines and art so that it looks as good, whether it's the little 1 inch by 1 inch on a business card or multiple feet by multiple feet up on a billboard. So that tends to be where we save our like branding materials that we want to be able to use on a wide range of materials. It is very good for printing. It does retain the ability to contain separated elements. And you do have to have a software program that can read that and allow you to access those separate elements. It is not ideal for photos. So what we've covered up to date tends to be better for any type of photography or photographic type material or complex shaded art. When you get into EPS files, they tend to need to be a little bit simpler than a photograph is. All right, next I want to talk about RAW and DNG, or digital negative files. So these are the native format that cameras will put out, and it's going to differ from camera to camera what these files are called. On Canon, I think my current file extension is CR3 on my Canon R5. Nikon will have a different file extension. There will be a different file extension on Sony, but there's a multitude out there, but they all basically do the same thing. They capture the image off the sensor in the rawest possible data. In other words, with the most latitude for data captured. Now, any photographer who's not familiar with RAW, the first time they shoot in RAW, they're like, oh my gosh, what happened to all the color? It like sapped all the color out of my image. Trust me, the color is there. But in typical, when you look at it on the back of your camera, you're seeing it with like this JPEG overlay that will let you see like the colors are different to help your eye determine what that should look like. So if you've been disappointed by RAW files in the past, just know that RAW files require editing. It's just like a negative used to be when we had film. Pictures didn't come out perfect off of the negative. When you went in to process the picture, you actually used a color head and displayed light differently onto the paper through the negative in order to get the colors that you wanted in your final photograph. The same thing has to happen. It just happens in a digital format now instead of in a room with a lot of chemicals. So trust me on this. I'm so happy about that. Anyway, back to these RAW and DNG files. When you are shooting photos professionally, or even if you're a really serious amateur, RAW is a really good format to have because it allows you the largest range of editing that you can get. In other words, you can change the white balance without necessarily degrading the image quality or causing an overlay of any kind. And remember back when I talked to JPEGs, as you continue to save JPEG over JPEG over JPEG over JPEG, we get more and more and more compression. Raw files are the starting point for all of that. So raw files are usually really big. They are not good for use in print or online because they need to be developed. They need to be processed in some way to actually make an image. All right. The next group of things I want to talk about is this sort of hodgepodge of other file types that you're going to run into as a graphic designer, photographer, or small business owner, whatever it is that you're doing. You're going to run into something called an SVG and another file type called WEBP, so WEBP. Both of these are, well, WebP is by Google. I'm not sure where SVG comes from, but these two file types were great ideas that haven't really caught on in the general scheme of how we work with each other, right? So you're going to see them, but they're not widely compatible. And if you send them to somebody, there may be a chance that that individual can't even open that file. And if you put them out onto social media, there's also an opportunity that certain browsers can't read them, especially older ones. So they haven't really gotten the wide acceptance of the file types that we have talked about thus far. BMP files tend to be things that are created by Word documents. Like when you put an image into a Microsoft Word document, it tends to come up as a BMP. And it's not another one of those sort of odd man out file types that like never really took off in the general mainstream way of developing graphics. So it's another one that causes sometimes a little bit of a hitch. If you send it off to a graphic designer, they're a little bit like, why did you send me this? So do you not have a JPEG or a TIFF or a PNG of this file? So just know that that's not a widely accepted graphic format. So HEIF is high efficiency image file, and it is the way that your iPhone will now natively try to save the pictures that you capture on your iPhone. I'm not sure if it translates to Androids. I am very much living in my Mac world. But the HEIF files, they're not widely compatible either. So right now, if you send an HEIF file to another Apple phone user, so an iPhone user, typically, or an iPad user, they're going to open really easily there, but they don't tend to translate really well into other things. And so you almost always need to save them or send them as a JPEG if you want it to be truly compatible across a lot of devices. Now, just a hint for you to be able to use that or to do that, when you go to share your photo, and like send it off through AirDrop or through Messenger or wherever you're sending it. When you select it and you go to send it, it will have an option. If you click on like options, it'll be there. I promise. Just look around the screen once you hit send. And if you touch options, there will be a place in there where you can check most compatible, and that will actually make it a JPEG. So it will be much more compatible over multiple different devices. It can be opened pretty much anywhere at that point. PSD stands for a Photoshop document, and there's a couple of other Photoshop document extensions that come along with the PSD, like that you can save Photoshop files in. There's one specifically for very large, complex images that you can utilize as well. So PSD is another file type that you can use. All right. And there's more. There's as many graphic software programs out there. There's as many native file types that you can save out there as well. These are just probably the most common ones that you're going to run into, and probably some that you will never ever see. All right, so I do want to talk just a moment in this video about pixels. So pixels are a unit of linear measure. And you can see in the image that's on your screen right now that we have a pixelated rose. Now, the further you get away from the rose, the more of a rose it actually looks like. And the closer you get to it, the more you can see just those variated pixels. So you can tell from looking at this image how a JPEG might compress those different colors. Like there's several colors of purple and black that a JPEG could make completely black. And we probably wouldn't notice much of the difference with our eyeballs. So in the end of the day, though, here's what I want to impart to you in this particular slide, and that is that resolution is redundant. Here's what happens. You send let's say you send a JPEG file off to a graphic designer, and the graphic designer says, hey, this is not high enough resolution. This is a typical thing designers say. And if you're a designer and you're listening to this, please stop saying that to your clients because it doesn't translate. Resolution to them means the number that is pixels per inch, which is actually device dependent or output dependent. So without getting complicated and like making this worse for you, a screen will typically display an image at 72 pixels per inch. A printing device, like when we go to do graphic design, is typically 240 to 300 pixels per inch. Large format printing, like banners and billboards, will typically be at 150 pixels per inch. All of that does is it says how many inches that given image is going to be able to just be displayed at full capacity on that particular image. So let's say you have a 2000 pixel image. So it's 2000 pixels on the long side or 2000 pixels square. That would work too. On a computer, it is going to be a little under 20 inches because it's 72 pixels per inch, right? That means it would take up an entire monitor for most people. But if we take that over and we put it on a print document where we need it to be 300 pixels per inch, now it's more like 4 inches. Does that make sense? So it's the number, the 72, the 240, the 150, the 300, it doesn't matter. It's redundant. It just simply is information that tells you how many inches that image would be displayed at. It's the amount of pixels that make the difference. So a 2000 pixel image on a screen is going to be big. A 2000 pixel image on a piece of paper, like in a print project, is going to be small. So it's understanding that is what is important. So whatever your project is, when you look at the pixels in your image, and you can see that in a multitude of ways, just look for file info somewhere on whatever software program you're viewing that image in, and it should tell you the pixel size of that image. Divide that by whatever number the destination is going to be. So divide it by 72 if it's going to be on a screen, and it'll tell you how many inches that photo would be able to be displayed at 100% on a screen. Divide it by 300 if you're sending it to somebody to put it on a brochure, and that's the maximum number of inches that image would be able to be displayed at. This is where we get into trouble with sending iPhone photos to graphic designers. And if you're a graphic designer, you probably have at least gotten one of these, if not multiple ones, of somebody who wants you to take an iPhone photo and put it on a billboard. So first of all, iPhone photos are shot with very wide angle lenses that aren't like super good glass. I mean, because it's not easy to replicate that in a little tiny iPhone camera. Secondly, they're not going to have enough pixel resolution to be able to be displayed that high, right? So it's not that the photo doesn't look good on your screen. It looks great, but on the screen, it's compressed. In other words, the pixels, it looks huge, but when you actually put it up on any type of printing device, it's going to look really super small. Now, arbitrarily where those numbers came from. I don't know. That's how the software works, right? It does take a higher resolution to be able to translate to a printing press than it does to a digital device. And I know it's super confusing for people, but it matters. It matters in how we look at our images and how we send them to people and how we share them with people. So let me give you a little bit of a rundown of how the size actually matters in real life. For websites, your images need to be small. In typical, when you look at the size of the image, it needs to be in KBs or kilobytes. If you're sending it to print, it needs to be large, as in megabytes or MBs. Image for reproduction need to be the largest files of all. I hope this has helped you guys. I hope you have enjoyed this presentation and learned a little bit of things along the way. I will see you in another video. Meanwhile, happy sorting of your image files now that you understand them better.